Hello, I'm Leigh Timmis, and welcome to the Rogue Monkey podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 109 of the Rogue Monkey podcast. We're here to share stories that inspire, both professionally and personally, to help you on your journey, whatever challenges you face. In today's conversation, I'm extremely grateful to be sitting down with two-time world record holder, cyclist, speaker and author Leigh Timmis. Now, I read a lot of books, but Leigh's book, The Race of Truth, will go down for me as one of the fastest books I've ever consumed, devouring all 368 pages in under 24 hours. I'm not going to share too much about it, as Leigh's story you really have to hear firsthand, but suffice to say, his travel stories are incredible, his record-breaking rides are unbelievably fast, and his humility and graciousness is extremely humbling. This is one of my favourite conversations I've had on the podcast, and I'm super excited for you to hear it. So we're going to get straight into it, and episode 109, and our conversation with world record-breaking cyclist Leigh Timmis. Leigh, hello, and welcome to the podcast. How are we today?
Yeah, really well. Thanks very much for having me on here. It's a pleasure to be around.
Super grateful for you sharing some time with me, and I guess we should start with the story of how I first heard about your story. So sitting on an aeroplane reading a book on the way to holiday, and what felt like kind of 10 hours later, I hadn't put it down and was like, I need to speak to this guy. And then a few emails and publishers later, and here we are. So very grateful for you obviously sharing some time with me today, but for the uninitiated out there, give us a bit of an introduction as to who you are and a bit about your story.
Yeah, thanks so much. That's I'm really grateful for you choosing my book to read on the airplane. That's awesome. So I'm Leigh. The book is it's called The Race of Truth, and it's about the first world record that I broke. I'm an ultra endurance cyclist. I cycled around the world for 7 years, and when I came back, I broke a world record for the fastest cycle across Europe. A couple of years after that, I broke a world record for the greatest distance cycled in 7 days. And I'm also a motivational speaker.
Just a few threads there for me to pull on, and I almost don't know where to start, but I guess, again, I'm biased because I've obviously done quite a lot of reading and watching on your story, but let's take us back to the earliest years of getting on a bike, because you know, the phrase, it's just like riding a bike, implies that we've always done it and everyone did it when they were young. But I guess the impact that it's had on your life now, you can probably reflect back to maybe that early experience with a little bit more fondness than most of us.
Yeah. I think very similarly to, like you said, like a lot of people, I got on a bike when I was young. It's kind of the first bit of freedom that you have, isn't it, really? Like the first time that you get that forward momentum and you're kind of independent. You've got your own wheel as well. That's cool. So I remember, there's a picture of me on this balance bike when I was a real little kid. I had a picture of a bunny on the front, so we called it the bunny bike. And that's some of my favourite pictures in our family photo albums. And then as I grew up, I think in my core memories, I always had a bike next to me. I was always on a bike. So me and my sister grew up on a bit of a building site. My dad wanted to build his own house. So for a few years, we grew up surrounded by scaffolding and half-built houses and bricks and stuff. And I remember getting bricks and planks of scaffold to build little ramps and like make little tracks on my BMX. And then as I got older and went to secondary school, I got into bikes in a bigger way. There was a show and tell day at school when people brought in, I don't know, like jerseys of Derby County players. I'm from Derby, so that was the kind of thing. Or I don't know, tennis rackets and stuff. And there was this carbon fiber mountain bike on the balcony in the school. And I thought that was so cool. And from that moment, I wanted to get into mountain bikes. And I did. Like I just saved all my money from paper rounds and bought bikes, and then got into mountain biking in quite a big way. There was me and two 2 or 3 friends who used to hang out every day after school. And it's those like real, I don't know if winter ever existed in secondary school memories. Like when I think back to it, it's always summer. It's like riding down these dusty trails in the woods and the light shining in between the leaves. And, you're rattling the bike over the roots and then doing jumps. And it's all this cool stuff. It's real like camaraderie. It's friendship. It's adrenaline. And it's moving forward all the time. For me, yeah, the bike was just super exciting when I was young. And then I held on to that while I was at university, but I went through this strange phase, and I think it's maybe it's not that strange, not that unusual, actually. I think a lot of people probably go through it when we start to get coerced towards this idea of success, or certainly in my mind, it was what society expects of you or expected of me, which was, to get the best degree that you can. Then you get a job that earns good money and all that respect of your peers, and to climb your way up that social ladder. And at that point, I stopped cycling, put the bike down, didn't pick it up for a year. In fact, at that time, the house I lived in got burgled. The bike went in that burglary, and I never got one back because I just thought, why not just take that money and be more successful? And at that time, after university, friends all moved away. I became a self-employed filmmaker, put my heart and soul into that, took more and more work on. Didn't really realize that I didn't have the skills to do that. Started letting clients down, didn't really have anyone to turn to. Became quite a lonely and difficult time for me, and struggled with my mental health at that point. I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety, which kind of leads towards the beginning of going around the world, actually.
I'm really curious because, again, there's so many avenues there. And whenever we speak to almost anyone over the last kind of 4 or 5 years of this show, there's always those kind of early formative experiences, those threads that started something, a passion, an experience, whatever it was. And I guess, how do you go from I'm passionate about something, I've spent quite a lot of time doing it, through to I'm going to go around the world? What does the leap look like from, was it the fact that you were in a dip in life that made you feel like, well, I've got to do something radical to change? What was that? What was the driving force to go from where you were to embarking on, what perhaps you might have told your parents was maybe 10 months or a year or a little bit longer, and it kind of got a bit carried away?
Yeah, I told everyone it was going to take 2 to 3 years. It took 7 in the end. I think it comes down to a lot of different things, and I think it's a situation that a lot of people get to, and it's a difficult one to take that leap of faith, if you like. I think a lot of people, like you've just sort of hinted towards, a lot of people come to a moment where they want to do something massive. Maybe they want to start a business, or they want to go on a massive adventure, or there's a huge change in an organization. You just don't know how you're going to make that change. It's very difficult. And there's a lot of opportunities for people to talk you out of it as well, isn't there? That's a crazy idea. Why would you do that? Why don't you do that when you retire? Or, I just don't know how I'm going to get there. Maybe this isn't the right time for me. Maybe I should wait for it. And I think that in some ways, I would never say that people are fortunate to struggle with their mental health. I think it's a really difficult thing to go through. I wouldn't want people to go through the same struggles that I went through when I was young. But at that time, I can see now, looking back, that from those darkest times, like the greatest opportunity came out. I would say that in a way, where people might look at a situation and go, oh, if I leave my day job and go off and do that, what if it doesn't work out? What if I lose all my money and I can't, I'd have to move back in with my parents, it'd be awful, all that sort of thing. I kind of felt like I had nothing to lose, which is strange to look back at it now. But I remember, so there was an opportunity that I got at that time. I was really struggling, and I worked in a city learning centre in Newcastle, and 2 of the technicians that I worked with there used to go off on these incredible adventures. They'd come back and they'd talk about cycling through Norway, through like the fjords, or fishing in the far reaches of Scotland, the most isolated areas in Europe, and every time I just came, like, it conjured up these incredible images in my mind of like escapism and adventure and like really being alive. But I thought, I can't do that. I'm a filmmaker. Like, this is my lot in life. And one year they came in and they were like, oh, we've got a plan for this summer. We're going to go to Iceland on motorbikes. Do you want to come with us? And I was like, oh man, that is insane. How can we do that? Like, how can a normal guy with a normal job go off and do that? But we did it, and it was real grassroots. It was a shoestring budget. We had the same kind of bikes, these enduro bikes, and for like the couple of months before we went away, we took them over to Chris's house and we stripped them back. And I remember one weekend we went into his garage and it was full of all these office chairs, and we were like, "What have you done? Like, you've emptied the offices?" And he's like, "Yeah, they were getting rid of them. I thought it'd be really good materials for building for our bikes." I was like, "What are we doing?" And we took a saw and a welder to them, and we made our own pannier racks for the bikes and then fixed everything on it. It was really old school, but yeah, we did. It belonged to us. It was cool. And so we went to Iceland for a month off-roading to these totally isolated places, climbing volcanoes and swimming in these rivers of hot water and walking across glaciers. And my eyes were just open to this world out there where I was facilitating other people's stories, like helping people to make their stories in film, or spending long days in dark editing studios. And I realized that there's this whole amazing world out there, and I could do anything that I wanted. And I came back from that and pretty much just traveled straight off. I reassessed what I was doing. I was like, I've got to live this life, and got rid of the motorbike and the car and left the house. And within 6 weeks, I think I'd gone to New Zealand. I started traveling, and that was the catalyst. Like, yeah, I think that it takes something. I don't think that anybody would go, right, I'm working and now I'm cycling around the world. I think you need to dip your toes in the water a little bit. And Iceland was that for me. Then a couple of years backpacking. And then I was like, I could take those things that I'm really good at. I started to really enjoy traveling. It wasn't just the things that I did. It was the people that I met, the places I could go to. Like, it was all so awe-inspiring. And I remembered that passion from when I was a kid. And I think you see this in a lot of sports people, that when they go through difficult times in their life, they find themselves in their sport. You see it in Andy Murray, for example. Like, he was in that massacre in his school when he was young. His parents got divorced. His brother moved away, and he could be himself in tennis. And I would say that it was the same for me in cycling, that on the bike, I'm at my own pace. I'm doing my own thing. I'm seeing the world in my own way. And it's almost like a dance in a way. You can sprint or you can cruise, and the way the corners move, it's almost like poetry. So to link them up, the travel and the bike, it was a great thing. But I think that it took a lot of like storylines before that, good and bad, to come to that moment.
Interesting, really interesting. And I think, just like a piece of music where there's a lot of instruments coming together and eventually it all comes in that crescendo and you go, you're blown away by what happens next. And, we had probably about 5 or 6 seasons ago, we had Charlie Borman on, who traveled the world on a motorbike with Ewan McGregor. And he was talking about the fact that I asked him at the end of the interview the reflections on what got him there, and he said, I wouldn't change a thing, because if I hadn't have had the failures with my acting career and the lows that came with all of that, I never would have got on the bike and that got that map out on the table, that got a bit carried away of going, well, I think we could go here, and here leads to here. And before they knew it, they were going around the world. And when did that first bigger picture of idea of hitting the world map, not just we might do it, but actually just, right, there's the world map, and let's actually start thinking about what this could look like? What did that look like when it started to come together? Because that's quite big.
It is. It's a strange one though as well, because I would say that for going around the world, the preparation was so minimal. It's nice that you mentioned Charlie Borman, actually, because after Iceland, I backpacked for a couple of years. I lived in New Zealand. I thought I was going to be a snowboarder, actually. I thought I was going to be like a snow bum, traveling the world, going to the parties. And I went to New Zealand. And after a few weeks of learning to snowboard, like teaching myself, I came off and broke my collarbone. And that was the end of that. But like I said, I enjoyed what I was doing, the people I was meeting, the place I was going. So I stayed in New Zealand for a year. I went to Canada for a year. And when I was in Canada, I was earning quite good money working in fine dining in the bars in Vancouver. And Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman going around the world was one of those things that had always stuck in my mind, that incredible adventure, the places that they went to. There's a chap called Mark Beaumont as well, who has broken the world record for cycling around the world around the time that I lived in Canada. And I thought I could kind of combine those and go around the world. It doesn't have to be breaking a record. It could just be for the experience of it. So that's when I came back to the UK and I worked for a short while, but I didn't do an awful lot of preparation. My prep was to buy a few maps that I needed to get through the first few countries. My rough plan was to put Australia at the halfway point, because if I ran out of money, I could stop there and earn a little bit more and continue. And other than that, genuinely, it was such poor preparation. Okay, to the point of cycling down from Derby to Dover, spent a few days on the road. I'm free, it's great. Caught up with my parents in Dover. They said goodbye, and I got on the ferry, and I thought this is a great opportunity for a celebration. I went to the bar to order a beer, and the bartender served me in French. And it was the first time that I realized I didn't speak French. And I didn't speak Spanish or Italian or German. I didn't even know what language they speak in Uzbekistan, stuff like that. And I realized that I'd had these amazing ideas of the places that I get to, these amazing experiences, but no idea, like, how do they ever unfold? How do you get into those situations? How do you speak to people? And it's one of those really nice challenges. I think it's a lovely example of stepping out of your comfort zone. And I had to really regress into a childish way. So, you can get a long way by just gesturing. Hand gestures get you a long way. You can get a drink, you can find a place to sleep. I remember going to bakeries and stuff in France and just feeling like an absolute idiot, after getting degrees and being successful, and then you're out there doing something that you want to do, but you're so useless at it. But I started to realize you can get away with a lot and you can meet people. And when you start to explore your vulnerability and leave your bike, all the possessions that you own with people in a market, and then wander around and people want to know what you're doing there, and they start to teach you the numbers 1 to 10 and yes, no, please, thank you. And that invites you into new opportunities. I remember learning how to wild camp as well, because I'd never done that before. And the way that I ended up doing it was just knocking on the doors of houses that I was passing towards the end of the day, and sort of just gesturing, to put a tent in their garden. And so often people would be like, no, you don't sleep in the garden. You come in, join us. Where have you come from? Oh, I've cycled from England. And you show people the map and they're like, whoa. And suddenly their world is opened up. As soon as I started to share the best parts of my life with people, they want to share the best parts of theirs with me. And it was really humbling to realize that actually the best parts of some people's lives, a lot of people's lives in the world, is that in this small village in the middle of nowhere, somebody's slaughtered a cow that week, and so they've got fresh meat. Please join us for a meal. We've got meat this week. It's amazing. Or there was a guy, I remember I tried to take a photo with a lot of people that I was with, and this guy just wanted to stand with the things that he really liked. And it was literally like a radio and a melon or some kind of vegetable that he'd picked that week. And I was just like, yeah, you really can see the things that really make us happy. It's people around you. It's the simple things: good food, community, shared experiences.
Interesting.
Big tangent there. Sorry.
No, we can go in as many tangents as you like, and this is part of why I've been really looking forward to this conversation, is because of the range of things. We haven't even talked about world records and all these other things yet, and I find it fascinating that you've almost pendulumed from the most unprepared you could possibly be to taking every little detail that you could possibly prepare in terms of the European event. But we'll come to that in a minute. And without skipping over an entire circumnavigation of the world, at what point when you were going through it did you realize it was close to coming to an end, or did you have a kind of gradual drop down from it in terms of the last week, month, last couple of countries, whatever it was, or did you get to near the finish line and suddenly it all hit you and then you just dropped?
No. The end of going around the world came in quite an unexpected way, I would say. Like I said, my rough plan took me to Australia, so I cycled through Europe and then down the Silk Road to China, across Tibet, down through Nepal and India, Southeast Asia, and then down to Perth. By the time I got to Perth, I'd run out of money, so I worked for 6 months, and it's quite a nice lesson in a way to take these moments out of what you're doing to reflect. It's kind of a moment of punctuation. Take a breath, look at what you're doing. Is it what I want to do at the moment? And I had a great life in Perth. I was managing this cool bar. Like, I had such good friends there, had a nice relationship. I lived in a cool house with a bunch of artistic sort of traveler types. Really could have stayed there. But on the wall, I had a map of the outback of Australia, and it was like adventure was still calling. Like, no matter how good the life was that I set up there, I still wanted to go off and carry on traveling. So that was a really nice realization. It's very difficult to leave, but I got back on the road and went on this adventure through the middle of Australia. And sometimes I loved that the bike invited me into places. That vulnerability invited me into the homes of people. I saw such an intimate view of so many people's lives, but also it took me out into the middle of nowhere where you've got to live with your own skills, your own tools, your own water that you're carrying. That's all that's going to get you out of these situations. I love putting myself in those places. I think probably because it puts life into perspective. You're that human life that you think is so full of pressure and it's so important and all of these deadlines are coming. Actually, you're out in the middle of nowhere and you start to realize like the stars are massive, the landscapes are huge, and you just expect. Anyway, carried on traveling through Australia, New Zealand, sailed a yacht across the South Pacific up to Fiji, New Caledonia, and across the Philippines. Ran out of money again in Taiwan, and I stayed to teach English. And again, it was another great punctuation, another really good lifestyle, earning good money, great circle of friends. It's a world where you could get away with anything. Like, there were so few foreigners living in this area of Taiwan. But again, like, adventure was calling me. And while I was there, I did spend some time learning Chinese, and it took me to China, and I got a really nice in-depth version of China as well. Like, a lot of places that you travel through, even, the bike takes you into the gritty reality of the world. I wasn't going to the Taj Mahal and the Sydney Opera House. I was going to a small farm in the middle of nowhere that's never seen a cyclist from Derby. But learning a bit of a language as well, it took it another level again, and you could really get into a community and really start to understand what life was about there. Cycled through China, and then I went across to Alaska and cycled all the way down the west coast of the Americas. It was super cool. And by the time I got to the middle of South America, so we're like 6 years in, and I was running out of money again. People had started to hear about what I was doing. There were other cyclists on the circuit that I would meet, and they were like, "Oh, you Leigh? Oh, we've heard where you've gone, what you're doing. If you cycle all the way down to the bottom of the Americas, Tierra del Fuego, and then get a boat across to South Africa and go back up, that's like the ultimate cycling journey. You'll have done the longest one." And I started to realize that actually that wasn't what I was after. Like, at that point, I was starting to look for friendships and communities. I was stopping a lot more often on the bike. And I started to realize that maybe what I'd set off for in the first place, what I was trying to look for, I would never actually find on the bike. Like, I'd had this amazing journey of freedom and it had taken me to so many places, but I was always alone. You get to share bits of the journey. You meet cyclists, you maybe cycle for a week or a month or a few months together, but then it goes and you're alone again. And sharing experiences became really important. And I started to want more than what solo travel could give me. And so instead of stopping to work again, I would have been around the top of Argentina, Chile, Peru, that kind of area. I just used the remaining money and thought, okay, if I go across to Rio in Brazil and fly across to Morocco, and then we cycle home. So that's the way it went. It was the last few months. Morocco, up through Spain, France again, and back
Where you
into
could
England.
practice your French again.
Yeah, the only thing that I remember about French was the word for small tent was petit tente, but the way that I said it sounded like small aunt. So when I was saying to people, "Can I put my small tent in the garden?" they were like, "Why do you want to put your small aunt in our garden? Like, you crazy man." No, I want to sleep. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. I wasn't good at French. Spanish and Chinese went much better, but please don't test me.
So take us through morning number one, waking up in Derby afterwards. Was there a sense of, like you said there, you kind of discovered what you were looking for and realized perhaps you wouldn't find it just by continually going around on the bike? So once you stopped that, there was obviously another journey that was just getting going. And I guess you've had a bit of time to reflect on that now. What was your viewpoint on day one, week one, waking up going, right, I'm home now, friendship, community, stability, it's here. Now what?
Yeah, I think I found it difficult actually, because I kind of came back to the world that I'd left. I guess I thought that, I think people would understand this, that I went off to go around the world and I thought doing something like that, I would become like my heroes, like those people who've sailed around the world, climbed the highest mountains. Other people that I'd seen who had cycled around the world, they appeared so like just fearless. Nothing would ever faze them. Like imagine walking into a room and you're that person. You'd never have, I don't know, imposter syndrome. You'd never be anxious again. How could you be depressed when you've done that? And I realized that that hadn't changed actually. Like I came back into the world that I'd left with the same financial responsibilities. This time I was back living with mum. I'd used all my money. I had nothing left. You got to get a job. There's a load of expectations on you still. And I guess that this time I came back and I'd done something that people wanted to approach me for. So I got amazing opportunities to do a TED talk, to go to speak at a National Geographic event, to do interviews on TV and radio, to be in magazines. Everyone wanted a piece of what I'd done, and I was quite overwhelmed by it. I wish I could go back 7 years to that day now, and if I knew what I know now, I'd be like, "This is the moment, Lee. You've got to do this. Like you've worked 7 years, you've cycled around the world for this moment. Get on it. Do the social media, do the media circuit, do everything you can, and this is what you need to say." But I didn't. Like, how do you unpack 7 years of cycling around the world in a 3-minute interview? That sort of situation. How do I turn what had become normal life to me, like waking up in a tent, cycling for a whole day, and then falling asleep at sunset in the middle of a desert or in a forest or whatever, had become natural, and I didn't understand what people wanted to know about it. It's like, you know, you work in the mines. That's incredible. Tell us all about it. I just didn't understand what was different, and now I do. I tell you how normal life had become. Actually, at the end of one of the first days being back in Derby, I was just walking around the city, and the sun was starting to go down, and I suddenly had a panic. I was like, "I've got to find water. I can't carry on cycling this evening if I've not got water in my bag. I won't be able to eat." And I suddenly realised, just go home and you've got water in a tap. Like little things that become so normal didn't need to happen anymore. So it was quite hard and quite difficult, but I was very lucky with the people that I met after going around the world. I met a guy called Steve who became a mentor to me, still is. He was really successful in telecommunications. He had his own company, and he started to show me how the things that I had learnt from going around the world applied to everybody's life. The challenges that I'd faced could help everyone to learn something about what they were going through, about themselves. And so we started to unpick what I'd done and try to kind of comprehend it a bit. It's a bit like a debrief from going around the world. And Steve helped me to change my perspective on what I'd done. I thought that going around the world was the greatest thing I could ever do. How could you ever top that? So I thought it was the end of cycling for me. And Steve saw it as just the beginning. He sort of said, from this, you can do whatever you want. So what do you want to do? And that's what led me into the world records afterwards.
So again, I find it fascinating going from the, I guess, the journey of self-discovery to the discovery, and then that kind of question that, I guess maybe a generation ago, it would have been, you get a job, you stay in that job until you're, like you said, the societal expectation's the norm until you're old enough to retire, and then you sail off into the sunset. Whereas I think a lot more people now, every 3, 4, 5, 10 years are going, right, now what? Right, now what? And perhaps career changes or new goals, new ambitions. And I think it was probably, again, quite a few seasons back, maybe the same season as Charlie, we had a guy called Krish on, who ex-SAS mountain explorer, and he's been to the top of Everest a few times. And like the typical tourist, I said, so what's it like at the top of Everest? And in the most Nepalese way you could possibly imagine, said, it's not about the top of the mountain, it's about the journey. And obviously I'd walked straight into it. And I think it's funny how you almost have to finish the journey to realize you're actually on the journey. Every day is the journey, but it's the now what next? And that pendulum effect from going from, oh, we'll just head to Dover and get a ferry and we'll see what happens, to we're going to go from here to here as quickly as possible. We're going to plan out every minute detail, and it's not just going to be me. I'm going to have a support team. There's going to be this and this and this. And I guess working in elite sport, I know what that bit looks like. So how did you go from that end of the spectrum to that end of the spectrum? And just talk us through that process, because I think a lot of people hear, oh, he's got a world record for this or that, and they don't necessarily appreciate how much work goes into preparing for something as hard as what you did.
Yeah, absolutely. It's especially actually, that comprehension of how difficult it is. A lot of people looked at that record, and there'd been people previously who had done it supported and who had done it unsupported. And a lot of people said, well, you've got it easy, you've got a team. But someone has to build that team, and someone has to make sure that that team's got kind of a strategy to work towards, and that all those visas are covered, and that the team building's done. There's so much that goes into it. It's not just like, I've got a bunch of mates who are going to come out to Europe with me, it's going to be a laugh. Like, there's so much that actually goes into it. And there's a scientific team from universities across the UK and aerodynamics specialists. It was all encompassing. But how do you get there from going around the world? It came down to a conversation. So I was looking for the next thing for quite a few months after coming back. And my mindset was that I'd done like adventure travel already, and it had to be something different. I'd seen this guy when I was quite young. I saw somebody, I can't remember his name, he's given a talk on running across Africa or walking across Africa or something. And at the end, somebody asked him when he'd done it. And it turned out that it was 10 years since he'd actually done that. And he was still going on the circuit, still talking about the same thing. And I was like, I couldn't do that. I couldn't live off one thing for the rest of my life. And I think that subconsciously, it definitely wasn't a conscious decision, but I think I always want change. I want to dig deeper. I want to learn something more about myself. How deep can you dig into yourself? What can you get yourself out of? How dark can things get and you still keep pushing? So I needed or wanted change. And I saw that there's a chap called Sean Conway. He's a good guy. He came on, an adventurer. He attempted the world record for going across Europe that summer, and it was in a magazine. I was like, I could do that. Like, I could do that now.
Paint the context for the listeners and viewers of what the world record was and the scale of it, because I think, again, for any novelty or any weekend cyclists who go out for a 10 or a 15 miler, this will probably put that into context.
Yeah, it's the world record for the fastest cycle across Europe, and it starts. There are two of them actually. There's the east to west, which is the one that I was interested in, and there's a north to south. Maybe if we have a question around what's next, we might talk about that. But yeah, so east to west. I started in the west and went east. So I started at Lighthouse in a place called Cabo de Roca, which is the coast of Portugal. And you go to the furthest point east, which is a city called Ufa in Russia. It's the last city before the Ural Mountains that divide I guess, continental, like geographical Europe from Asia. Ufa is about 1,000 miles into Russia. So the total distance is 4,000 miles, 6,500 kilometers. And the record, when I looked at it, sat around 24, 25 days. And I thought, I could do that unsupported. Why don't I just set out and do it now? It's probably towards the end of the summer. And it was Steve, the guy who was mentoring me, who sat down with me and actually started digging into how I was going to do it. And I started to just go, I just get a bike and off I go. And he was like, yeah, but what's the best way that you could do it? And we talked about doing it supported or unsupported. And supported was a much better opportunity to get a good result. But God, it was going to be a huge financial outlay. It would take a lot of time to do it. Why would you do it that way? And Steve was like, because you'll get your best results. You want to find out what you're capable of doing. And he was like, what? And what about risk? I was like, yeah, but it doesn't matter about risk. I'll just go out there and do it. And he was like, would it be better at supported or unsupported? I was like, yeah, okay. Supported takes out the risk and it's better. And he was like, then that's the way that you'll do it. And so this started a whole new way of looking at things. I was quite a chancer. Like I would just have gone out and had a go at it, just have a shot. And this made me look into the real detail. And we're talking about kind of the swinging from one extreme to the other on this pendulum that goes between chancing it and going off and just seeing what happens and plotting out every minute detail. But there were actually quite a lot of parallels between the two. Going around the world, my whole life was all consumed in just cycling around the world. Like there was nothing else to do every day. And coming back to a world where you've got all these responsibilities, relationship, pressures, finances, again, I could simplify my life a little bit in a way by having it all consumed in one project. This year, I'm going to do a world record. And everything that I did worked towards that. There were other elements, and I hope that you might have seen the parallels in the book as well, where on the bike going around the world, I became quite almost animal, almost metronomic, working with the sun. So the sun came up in the morning, I got up, I packed my things in a specific way on the bike so that if I needed to find things, I could just reach for them really quickly. Everything was organized. I rode and I knew that I needed nutrition to get me through the day. I needed water. I needed to meet people to support me. And at the end of the day, the sun goes down and it's the end. You go to bed, you wake up the next day. Actually, it was really similar for the world record. I built a team and it was very holistic. So it was a team of sports science experts across physiology, psychology, nutrition, and physiotherapy. They all worked together, this multidisciplinary team, to make sure that I was performing my best across all of those areas. Where previously people had attempted this record by just riding for more hours in the day to go further at the end, we looked at how you make the most of every hour. So if I was cycling, how do you get the best performance? If I'm sleeping, how do we make sure I'm sleeping as well and for as long as I can? What food am I getting in? What powers am I outputting on the bike? What's my mindset through all of this? Because it's your mind that's going to let you down. And that became a really important part of the project. Maybe we'll go into a bit more detail of that. But to go back to the question, the difference between round the world and the world record, it was much more about the performance and the outcome for the world record, but actually that journey and the way that I went about doing it, it was very much about taking what I'd learned from that dream world of global travel and bringing it to the real world of athletic performance.
Well, let's talk through some of those preparation experiences because, again, I think a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate. I mean, you've already alluded to both the university side of things and the sports science and the various disciplines that fed into the support team. But in terms of your preparation, were there any, I say highlights tentatively because I know some of them are quite challenging, but let's say some of the key moments from that preparation period that stick with you and perhaps wake you up at 3:00 in the morning in a cold sweat?
Yeah, there's one that comes to mind straight away. And I think it's really interesting that from the outside, you might look at a world record of cycling across a continent and think that's legs and it's lungs and it's heart. That's a physical endeavor. But actually, And it's the thing that surprised me the most. The biggest learning was in the psychology. Um, I worked quite intensely with a psychologist from the University of Derby. Got on really well. It was brilliant, and it was eye-opening for me because I guess one of the things that I'd never done through everything, like through counseling when I was going through those troubles in my 20s, I wasn't in the place in my life, or I wasn't brave enough to look within and admit that there's elements of me that I don't like, things in my character that aren't serving me, and I can change them. I think it's a hard thing to do because you have to acknowledge that there's some bad stuff in there. And I didn't when I was going around the world. I expected to go away and to change and come back a different person. But actually, if you want to change, you've got to look inside. You can't just go searching the world and expect to find it outside of you. And when I came back and did this world record, that's the new adventure that I went on. Like, what's going on inside me? What's going on in my thought processes? And that's the work with the psychologist. So a lot of what we did was creating what we called the lifestyle of an elite athlete. And it's really basic stuff. Like, that talent that you build has to have an environment that will enable it to grow. So that came down to real basics of time management. I was all over the place. I had a paper calendar, I had a digital calendar. We combined it all. We made sure that everything was scheduled through the day. And if I had gaps in the things that had to happen at certain times, I could do my to-do list and making sure that that was kept up to date. And just making things visual, it helps so much. I don't know if other people are the same as me, where you've got so many whirring thoughts, nothing's quantified, nothing's written down, and it becomes overpowering. You just see all of this pressure and stress, and you very easily get overwhelmed and start to crash. So organization, time management, and sleep was a massive one as well. So sleeping and all of these things I started to fight against because I wanted to be a great cyclist. What are you doing teaching me how to go to sleep or, create a timetable? And so I was invited in to do this test. The physiologist and psychologist put together a test for me called an endurance threshold test. And it was really simple. It was going into the university in one of the labs, which was emptied completely. It was the lab that we used to do the ramp tests in, but they emptied out all the equipment. It was just an empty room, white walls, one door on the wall behind me, no windows, no monitors, no music, nothing. And this endurance threshold test was very simple. It was 4 hours on a static bike, and every hour the resistance of the static bike increased. Fine. So they explained it to me. Are you okay to go? Oh, every half an hour they're going to collect blood lactate from my finger and maybe RPE, something like that. But it was basically me riding a bike. Fine, cool. I can do that day in, day out. It's no problem. So we set off, and the first hour was just cruising along. It was kind of almost just warm up. I don't know, 180 watts, something like that. Spinning my legs. And I was like, this is easy, piece of cake. The only thing that started to get a little bit tiresome was this very hard saddle, and there wasn't much grip, much bar tape on the handlebar, so that started to ache a little bit. Contact points always do, so you just go through it. And I was like, we've got an hour down now. If that's the only problem, I've only got 3 more hours to go. Perfect. Start the second hour, the resistance increases a bit. I think up to 210 watts. It's fine. And I think at that point, in the second hour, the only thing that was really getting to me was the monotony, because the thing that I love about bikes is, I think I said this little phrase earlier, that poetry of like cornering with the world. You feel every contour, you brake going down the hill, you force the pedals going up, and you just glide around the corners. And you don't get any of that on a static bike. It's just left, right, left, right, left, right. There's no freewheeling, there's no braking, there's no hills. You've just got to keep going. But we're 2 hours in, I'm like, that's halfway, let's go. Third hour comes, the resistance increases again. And at this point, I'm starting to get quite a few doubts, maybe, in my mind. It's close to 250 watts. I should be able to handle this quite well. I'd go out and do training rides at that. but I'm feeling like my heart rate's a bit too high. Maybe I'm starting to drip with sweat a little bit. And I started to wonder if I'd given it everything that I could. Maybe I'd had a biscuit on one of the days that week and it was against the nutrition program. If I'd not done that, I'd be in a better position now. Or there was a night this week when I'd stayed up an hour later to get some sponsorship paperwork done, and I should have just prioritized my sleep. I should be better than this on the bike. This isn't going the way that I want it to, but okay, we're in the third hour now. One more hour to go. And the fourth hour came, and the resistance went up the last time, and it became really tough. It was close to my threshold. And for the whole 3 hours before that, I just kept thinking, it's only 1 hour to go, it's only 2 hours to go, whatever, it'll be fine. And in the fourth hour, I started to change that, and my mind started to go, actually, I can't do this. I need to get this stopped. The physiologist was working in the corner with one of his master's students, and I just kept looking over and thinking, as soon as that master's student goes, I'll get him over and we can change this. But that master's student didn't go, and time kept ticking, and more thoughts started coming to my mind. And I think this is something that we all actually feel. You start to take your mind off of what you're doing, and suddenly everything was coming down to, if I got those opportunities when I was younger, I'd never be in this position now. Or if my dad had just said this to me when I was younger, I'd be fine. Like, why do people treat me like that when I was younger? All of those people that never said I could amount to anything, all of these like negative thoughts start spiraling, and I'm looking over, waiting for that master student to go, and she doesn't. And I'm watching the clock. I'm just thinking, I need to change this. And after it was just before 3 hours 30, I absolutely lost my head. And I stopped pedaling. I was just shouting, what are you doing over there? Why aren't you looking at me? Surely this must be your priority. Can't you see the blood lactate must be through the roof? My heart rate's all over the place. What are you doing over there? Come and look at this. What is going on? You need to change this now. And I'm banging my hand on the handlebars, and where they've been taking the lactate samples, there's blood going over the wall, and it's just a mess. And the physiologist came over, and he turned down the resistance on the bike, said nothing, and walked away. And it only took like a minute, maybe not even a minute, to realize what a complete arse I'd been. Like, if you were outside, if you were looking at that, you've just watched a grown man, a 35-year-old man, riding a bike in a room for 3.5 hours and then have an absolute tantrum out of nowhere. But in my mind, I'd gone through physical discomfort, and then physical, being overworked, and then this mental torture, and then going back through my whole life, unpicking all of these experiences, and started to realize that actually that needed to change. The scientists they didn't say anything to me. We had a debrief a couple of days later, and they explained to me that an endurance threshold test doesn't actually exist. It's something they'd completely made up to see if my physical capability was matched by my mental, my psychological capability. And it turned out that physically I could have kept riding at the same resistance that last hour for another 2 hours. But it was my mind that was letting me down in those situations. And I think that we all reach that. It definitely taught me about my reactions to high pressure situations, to discomfort, to the way that I handle situations, and the realization that you can't control a lot of stuff. You can't control a lot in life, but you can control your reaction to it. And that's what we did so much work on through the psychology of the project, knowing that actually out there on the road, you might have a great strategy. You might have everything planned in your head, but that's not going to happen. And when it doesn't, how are you going to react? What person are you going to be in that situation, and who do you want to be?
Well, I'm not going to spoil some of the other advice you got from the psychologist, because I want readers to go on that journey as well. And there were so many moments reading it where you went, aha, okay, and we were almost on that journey of discovery with you as you were coming up with these new things that you were getting thrown at you. Perhaps to start with wasn't quite working out, or you didn't quite resonate with it, but then the pieces of the puzzle started to click. And I know we spoke before we started recording about that, the journey to the start line. That was where, not that it was an end point or even necessarily a start point, but to get to that point on the coast of Portugal and go, it's been one hell of a journey to get here. Now, now I can put the pedal down with the sweeping roads and the nice views, no white walls here. So just talk us through, that day, that kind of few hours leading up to, the gun going off.
Yeah, like you said, a lot of people ask about the highlight of the world record, and I think most people expect it to be the finish line. Like, you cross the line and it's celebration, it's checkered flags, it's fireworks, parades, whatever. But actually, just getting to the start was the highlight for me, because you put together this dream. You've had this idea that sparked off a year before, and then for a year, like, I knew everything that had gone into that. How every penny of the sponsorship had been raised, how every pound had been spent on the equipment and the team building, and finding the individuals who are going to come out and do this with me, planning the strategy, the route, building the bike, that whole year of development and the different person that I had become, and then taking them to the start line, and suddenly you are there, and no matter what happens from that moment, it's going to unfold. You're actually going to attempt a world record. That's just brilliant on its own. Like, that really is so cool. And I'd done a lot of visualization work about getting to the start line and knowing how it would look and sound and feel. And I was there, and I think I kind of expected maybe to be overwhelmed and excited, but actually it was all kind of controlled and it was set and ready to go. And in those first hours, we set off at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was pitch black at the cliff, and one way is 4,000 miles of ocean across to America, and the other direction is 4,000 miles of road that I need to ride to Russia. And I set off up these winding roads through these little terracotta villages we'd seen the days before, and through little leafy suburbs, through Portugal. And then the world started to wake up, and the cafes started to open, and the coffee aromas fill the air, and the sound of people shouting in different languages, well, Portuguese mostly. The clanking of the cutlery and the crockery. And when the sun started to come up, we just got onto the top of this ridge line. And I remember looking down and realizing that we'd climbed to the height above the clouds, and the mist was rising, and there were windmills across the tops of these hilltops. And as the sun came up, it just cast this pink light over everything. And I just remember thinking how beautiful, how amazing it was. It's like this world of candy floss with windmills and me cycling across the top of it. And every sense was being fulfilled. And it's the thing that I've loved about bikes from when I was a kid all the way through going around the world. Like, every sense is being ticked off. You're smelling things, you're seeing things, hearing things, feeling the exertion to get to the tops of those hills and the gliding down. And I absolutely loved it. It was everything that I would hope it would be. And I guess I was kind of, torn between two things then. At one point, I'm like, doing a world record in the thing that I love. I'm absolutely like in the prime of my life right now. And the other side is, okay, we haven't actually got time for all of that. Like, this isn't this multi-sensory experience across Europe. This is a challenge. You've got to get your head down and get on with the job. But yeah, just getting to that day, getting to that moment, it was absolutely brilliant. And I think really all the way through day one, it was kind of just realization that I was out there and I was in a different country and I was racing and I was back to the thing that I loved and doing it in a different way. Yeah. Super cool to be heading towards another dream.
So the book obviously starts a little bit into the journey. And again, without spoiling it for the readers, there was a couple of experiences on the way that were quite, could have been very derailing, if you like, had you not gone through all that preparation. And I guess there might be a reflective part of you somewhere that's gone, if I'd have been told about this and I'd have done what I did last time and just gone over and done it myself, would you have had the fortitude and the resources to be able to manage that? So just take us through a couple of those experiences.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two, like, you've got these peaks and troughs through an adventure across a continent. And so, you've got that first peak at the beginning, and you come into two troughs really. One is a physical low and one is a psychological low. The physical low is really day 10. I fell off the bike, and it was yeah, like you said, it could have been much worse. If I'd have been on my own and broken stuff or, fallen under a truck, anything like that. But it also almost, I've never thought of it this way actually, but the low kind of led to a high as well, like when we were talking about the depression then going around the world earlier. So day 10, already 10, 10 days in, I've cycled 2,500 miles pretty much. I'm in Poland, and I'd been really tired since day 7, and I was swapping out. Our strategy was really cool actually. Very briefly, it was scientific based. It was all based around riding in blocks of time, 4-hour blocks with half an hour in between. And on each of those breaks, it was a bit like a Formula One pit crew. Like I had to get food in. I did a brief psychological analysis. I had a quick physio session. I did a quick interview for the social media stuff that we were putting out. The road operations manager uploaded the data from the last one, downloaded the GPS tracks for the next block. It was a real quick turnaround. But from day 7, I started to sacrifice physio and just put in a bit of a power nap because I wasn't getting the quality or quantity of sleep that I wanted in the night. And so I just added up a little bit more in the day. And that's all that was on my mind on day 10. I'd been riding for 8 hours. We were getting towards the second break and I wasn't paying attention. I was just full of all these ideas of like these negative spirals that we can find ourselves getting into of, I'm not awake enough. I need to be better than this. I just need that sleep. And I wish I'd have, I don't know, changed strategy, whatever it was, all these negative thoughts, wasn't focusing on the road, didn't really think about how fast I was going down this hill, didn't look in front of me at the patch of gravel in the middle of the road, and the front wheel just skidded out. I ended up landing on the road pretty hard. And the team all come running over, and I'm just laying there, like basically just thinking, I've just got no more, like I've got nothing left to give this. And they come over and they pick me up, and I just want to walk over to that motorhome. I just want to get in there and have a sleep until the physio shouts over to me, Leigh, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I just need to sleep. And she's like, not like that, look at the state of you. And I've cut my knee and my hip's bruised. I've torn my shorts and my jersey. Like I'm a bit of a mess. And for the half an hour when all I wanted was sleep, all I actually got was more pain. Like everything has to be cleaned out, disinfected. I've still got to eat. I've still got to do the analysis. The media guy's still got to do his part. And after half an hour, I'm back out on the bike. There's no change to the strategy. And I get back on the bike and it's the same negative thoughts, but they're just added to this time. So, look at the state of your cycling. If you fall off again, you could end up under the traffic. You're going to get yourself killed. You're not good enough to do this. And about 10 or 15 minutes after I leave, the team have packed up and they catch up with me. And the road operations manager shouts something out to me that completely changed the day. It would sound really abstract, but I'll give you a bit of a background. He shouts out, what's the view like from the balcony? And it completely changed my mindset. So working with the psychologist, there was a lot of interventions that we put in place. And one of them was this thought that at the finish line of the world record, the only person that I had to justify my finishing time to was myself. Anyone else looking at it, if you looked at it, you wouldn't know what those minutes or hours or days meant. Like it's just a finishing time. But I had to be able to look back and say, I put everything into that. That is the best time that I could get. So I've got no regrets about the decisions that I made. In order to turn that into a bit of an intervention, we took that finish line version of me and put him up on this metaphoric balcony. With the idea that at any difficult time, I could look up to that future version of me and ask for advice. And I remember in that psychology session, the psychologist asked me, if you were looking down on yourself and it's raining and you're cold and you're tired and you want to give up, you're slowing down, you want to stop, what would you shout? And it was really obvious, it's just keep going. Just don't stop. Just put one foot in front of the other. If that's all you can do, just keep going. And that became really important. Like, I think that, I don't know if I realized at the time, but certainly, like looking back now, that was the first time I really realized that it wasn't about like a race against a competitor or even a race against the clock. Like It was just a race against the best version of me. Like, who do you want to be at that finish line? What are the decisions that you make that get you to be that person? So we're on day 10, and Jem shouts out, "Yeah, what's the view from the balcony?" And suddenly, after all of these negative thoughts, you can very easily get stuck in that rut, can't you? I looked back and remembered who I wanted to be, and I wasn't giving it everything. I couldn't look back and say that I'd given it everything. I had no regrets, and so I had to decide what I wanted to do at that moment. And I flick on this playlist. We'd made a lot of playlists for different situations, and this one, the first song that came on was "The Eye of the Tiger," and like just that drums and guitar, and it all starts pumping. I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to be rocking. I'm going to smash my way through this," and decide to sprint. And I race past the team, and I'm stuck somewhere between wanting to give it everything, or wanting to just bury myself. Like, if I just give it everything now, maybe I'll drill myself into the ground and I can't continue. I don't know. I was somewhere in there, but I realized that actually I could achieve way more than I'd expected, way more than I was letting myself do. And that sprint continued for 1, 2, 3, 4 hours, that whole block. And that was after that fall, when I was really like in the most pain and I was the most down for the whole world record. Like, that was the fastest block of the whole world record. It was quite amazing. That's how good those psychological interventions were. We did so much work on them, they paid off.
So I guess I'm curious now in terms of when you hear, I guess, stories of challenge in whatever physiological or psychological challenges it is, there, like you said, there comes the peaks and troughs, and often the trough, you bounce out of it. Otherwise we wouldn't be sitting here telling this story now of actually, that then brings you into the lifting bit. So, and again, they talk about when you get to, I think it's 40-50% of what you physiologically are capable of, you're barely even scratching the surface of what your psychology can then unleash, like another layer. So kind of coming into the back half of that and obviously making it to the finish line. Sorry for everyone with the spoiler. But the experience was effectively reframed from that point onwards, and that ability to look at, why am I here? What am I doing this for? Which is, I guess, a little bit ironic, because when you went around the world, you had that realization of, I'm chasing something. What is that? And okay, slightly more compressed time, but it was still a journey of self-discovery. So just talk us through the back half of that in terms of that personal viewpoint and how that changed for you.
Yeah. There's a few things that happened towards the end of the record. There was, I think you have to start defining what success is for you. And no matter how much work I would have done with the psychologist in the lead up to it, until you've actually done your first world record, your first race, your first attempt at something, you never really know how it's going to pan out. And there's definitely an element of me that needs to find things out the hard way. Like, I've got to go through it myself. I can't just be told, this is what you need to do. I have to figure it out myself. And I think figuring out what success is for me took doing it. There was a really difficult day when I'd lied to myself for the whole first, I can't remember what it is, 13 days, something like that. I knew we hadn't hit the numbers that I wanted to achieve something out of, like, something extraordinary that would never. So the scientists and I, we put together this best case and a worst case scenario. The best case scenario was 16 days. The worst case scenario was 20 days. But in my mind, I wanted to do something really special. Like, I wanted to show even the scientists that I'm better than they think. Bear in mind, these scientists know everything about me. They've tested everything about me. They know my psychology, my physiology, what I can physically achieve, mentally achieve. I don't know who I was kidding. And I think this would be something interesting for me to dig into at another time. And I think I need to do more study into myself. I feel like I'm doing a lot of that through my life. But on the first day into Russia, I kind of the wool that was over my eyes for the beginning of the record was pulled off, and I actually started to see what was real. And I thought that I was going to cross Europe in less than 2 weeks, less than 14 days. That would be something for the headlines of the newspapers. I'd be as big as my heroes. This would be it. I'd be amazing. And I suddenly realized, I knew that I had to cross 10 countries. I'd crossed 9, got into Russia. I thought, okay, well, you can kid yourself and say that's 10% left to go until you realize that Russia's absolutely flipping massive. Like, I still had 25% of this to go. And I realized that there was no way I was going to hit 14 days. And I said to the team, I said nothing to the team on the way out the motorhome that morning until I grabbed hold of the bike and said, I'm never going to do anything that impresses me. And started to realize that, like, where have these expectations come from, and who am I trying to impress, and what do I want to do? Like, what is going on here? And I think that was a really difficult one to work through. And to realize that actually I had realistic targets, and some of the things that I expected of myself weren't realistic. They were, I don't know where they came from. But the team were amazing through those times. It was a team, I think on that day, actually, it was the physiologist's wedding back in the UK. And even at the altar, I think the psychologist was there either as best man or as one of the guests there. And they were even talking about the record on the wedding day. Like, there was a team there that were there for me at those like important moments in their lives. There was a team that was following me across Europe. There was a team of friends and family back home who were supporting me every day. And just we had to cross Moscow, and this is how good the team were. I was riding really badly that day. It was the most dangerous day. It's the biggest metropolis, this swirling like vortex of traffic. In order to get across at the same time, I had to ride through the middle of the city. The team had to go around the outside on a motorway. So we'd be apart for a few hours. I was riding so badly, the team didn't want me to go. They were like, it's too dangerous. If you fall off again, you could be killed. There's no one there to pick you up. Last break of the day, I'm still riding badly. I go to the toilet. On the way back across the forecourt of the petrol station, the road operation manager puts his arm around me. He's like, Leigh, we've tried everything today. Caffeine, sugar, sleep, food, drink, energy, drinks, whatever, you name it, we've tried it and nothing's worked. You've got a team behind you who will do anything for you, but you're going to have to tell us what it is. What do you need us to do? You just let us know and we've got this for you. And when he said that, something changed in me. I started to realize, maybe subconsciously, because you're not considering all of this stuff when you're out on the road, but subconsciously, I think I realized that it wasn't just on me. Like, for so much time, I'd had this pressure on my own shoulders of like I've said already, I know where all that money's come from. I know how every pound of it's been spent. I know how every minute of preparation's been spent. I know how we got here. Can't trust anyone else. This is just me, and I've got to take it. And I suddenly realized that there was a team of people on the road, a team of people back home, friends, family, so many people supporting me. And it was all of us that were going across this together, not just me. And it wasn't until a few months after the record I reflected on it, and I was putting together a motivational talk, and I suddenly remembered what Jem said, the road operations manager. You've got a team here who'll do anything for you, just tell us what it is. And I was like, flipping heck, that's what every sports person wants to hear. It's what every CEO wants to hear, every manager, every coach. Wow, what made you say that? I think we've solved all the world's business problems. We can, this is it, we're made now. So I phoned him and I was like, so what made you say it? And he said, well, on that project, you wanted the cherry on the top, didn't you? I was like, yeah, I wanted to break the world record. And he said, I didn't. I wanted to build the cake. And I think I started to realize that this big Geordie mechanic, ex-military guy was actually more emotionally intelligent than I was at the time. He knew the importance of the journey. He knew that it was about trusting the process, building the cake. And I was just focused on the cherry. And he said to me, he saw the project as Swiss cheese, that cheese with all the holes drilled through it. And that cheese was cut into slices, and he saw his job as just lining up those slices of cheese so the holes all aligned, and then he could drive the motorhome through. And at the end of the day, I was just a slice of cheese. I put all that pressure on myself, thinking it was all about me, but every member of that team was equally as important. We all had to line up. And that's all that he had to do. When he couldn't figure out for himself how to line it up, he just asked the right question at the right time. And I think that was super important. So there was a lot of lessons towards the end. And really at the finish line, like you kind of alluded to in the question, it didn't come down to like this feeling of amazing, like, yeah, we've completed it. It was really quite a tricky one. And it took a long time for me to decompress from it. I thought that I was going to cross the finish line and be like, wow, world record holder. I'm going to be like those heroes of mine. Finally, I wasn't after going around the world. I will be this time. And I wasn't. Again, it's a strange feeling to still be you. You're still the person that you were, but now you've got a world record to your name as well. And that does bring the question of what is success. And I think that it's summed up really nicely in that view from the balcony. I had to be able to look back from the finish line of the world record with no regrets, to say that I gave it everything. And currently, and everything's subject to change. We change all the way through our life. But right now, I think that that's a great idea for success in life, to stand at the end of life and just look back and go, yeah, you know what? I gave that everything. I've got no regrets. I think that's a really good measure of success.
Yeah, and I talk about that a lot with parents of athletes that I work with, because I think kids get in sport, for example, and they're quite naive to perhaps what the big long-term picture looks like. They just want to play the game, turn up for the next event, see their friends. And what does the win look like? Again, a former guest, Kath Bishop, wrote a whole book about that, the long win and what actually is it. And I'm thinking back to the Olympics last summer, and one of the athletes not winning a gold, but in the emotional interview that followed, saying something to the effect of, it was really hard to get back here, and I promised myself if I was going to do it, I was going to give everything, every day, my absolute best. And I have. So I can't be disappointed. And I think how we define winning in whatever context, it can be in careers, relationships, personal fitness goals, anything. I think the ability to answer that question honestly to yourself, look in the mirror, if you like, or look up to the balcony, that's a really interesting space, because I think in the modern day and age, especially with some of the more skewed spaces out there in terms of social media, success and what it means to people has, I think, got lost for a lot of people. So I think it's just a fascinating area. And I guess it dovetails nicely onto the next step, because, you said you finished your first round the world, you went, the world hasn't changed. You've done that world record then, and you've got the certificate sitting behind you on the wall, and yet you decided you wanted another world record. So I just wondered, and again, I'm mindful these are massive journeys for you, but just take us on, again, that transition between, I've done one unbelievable thing, let's find another unbelievable thing to do.
Yeah. It's where do you stop?
Well, we don't.
Yeah, it's weird. I was having this conversation with somebody just at the weekend, actually. They told me about a book they're reading called 4,000 Weeks. I've never heard of it. But
Oliver Berkman.
Yeah? Apparently that's how long you get. If you live to 80, 4,000 weeks more or less, that's how long the average person would live. And it's all about, how you manage your time, what we make of our time. And we had a little discussion around how much of filling our time with all of these pursuits and achievements is kind of escaping from the undeniable fact that life is finite. It's a real tricky one. I do love being able to look back and say that I've got no regrets. And definitely up to this point, like you said from Charlie Borman, the highs and the lows, I wouldn't change any of those things, even those most difficult times. Who's that chap from D-Ream? Things Can Only Get Better. He's now the astrophysics guy on the BBC. His name will come back at a time that's completely inappropriate, but he I can't remember. I was going to bring that in now. Isn't that the way that this always goes?
Let's find him while you're recounting it.
Yeah.
It's Brian Cox.
Brian Cox. I've lost my train of thought about what he says. No, you're gonna have to edit this bit out now.
Oh, I don't do any editing. Ha ha. No, I definitely do.
We'll
So
come back in a bit. It's okay. We'll carry on. But as far as so the time that we spend, no regrets for sure. But I don't think that regrets have to be attached to success or achievement either. Maybe growing older, I'm realizing the importance of friends and family, that we all play our unique part in communities. I've done these different challenges. So after the race across Europe, the world record across Europe, did the 7-day world record, and that became a much bigger experiment or understanding of how teams come together in really adverse conditions. For 3 out of the 7 days, we had to fight our way through a hurricane, and nothing was about following the strategy anymore. It was all about adapting and seeing how people come together to get the best out of each other, the best out of me, how everything that we do impacts each other. At the end of the first world record, the one of the books about the Europe one, I come home and go out for a meal with a whole load of people who supported me. And in the queue to get around in, one of my friends turned to me and said, every day when you're out there doing the world record, the first thing that I did every day was check in to see where your tracker was across Europe. And I used to tell my friends about it, and I'd show off to my colleagues at work. But it wasn't about breaking a world record. It was the fact that you gave us something to believe in. You gave us hope. And I think that is really cool. Like, giving people hope, giving people something to believe in. I'd really like to kind of go forward using the things that I do, the stories that I've got to tell, to help other people through their own challenges. I think that's one of the best things that we can do. Right? Coming out of these, when you look back, they are amazing successes. Like, you become the best in the world at what you've done. But actually, like the whole thing has been about, it's the journey, it's what you go through, the adversity that you can face, showing that there is more. Like, when you're going through those really difficult times and it feels like there's nothing else, waking up for another day of pain, how are you going to get back on that bike? You can, and there's something better at the end. I think that's a really good use of our time. So looking forward, there's a few things that I want to do. There is the north to south record that goes with the east to west. Maybe that one will be done. Maybe there's something else. I've got this degree in filmmaking, and I'm at a time in my life when I've achieved some great things and I've got a lot of stories to tell. So maybe I'll revisit that. There's a book from cycling around the world that I would love to write and share. I'd love to play my part in the community that I live in as well, which involves being a brother and a son and a friend and a colleague. Like, those are equally as important things. Like, life is this amazing, rich tapestry of experiences, and we get to do it all. That's what Brian Cox says. Yeah. We're just this amazing part of the universe that gets to experience itself. Like, maybe we're the only sentient beings, we're the only ones with this consciousness, and we're experiencing it, and we should just be lapping it up. That's kind of like where the bike was for me, this multi-sensory experience across amazing vast distances. But there's ways to do that wherever we are, and how lucky we are to have these opportunities.
Well, Leigh, it's been absolutely fascinating. I've got one question to pull it all together, and you've given me it, thankfully. So, what would 60-year-old Leigh on the balcony, looking down right now where you are, what would the message be?
I would like to say that I've got no regrets. I think that we leave a legacy to the world in a few different ways. In our children. I haven't got any children. It's something I would like. I'd like to have kids. But in the people around us as well, like, what's the difference that we made to people's lives? I think that's one legacy. The work that we've done. So I currently work in mental health. I think that's really important. I've written the book. I'm proud to leave that. I think they're two great legacies. And then the impact on the wider world, I guess, who are you? What do you leave in the actions that you've taken? I'm quite proud to have pushed the boundaries of ultra endurance in some way. I'm not the most famous ultra endurance cyclist. I never will be. I'm not the most famous author, but I played my part in pushing that boundary a little bit more. I feel like I've contributed in some way. This short, if I'm looking back from 60 years, in that short 60 years, I've contributed quite a lot. I'd have no regrets about that. Yeah, I think there would probably be an element of change as well, like embracing change, really going for it, like dive in. I would hope that I'm looking back at 60 years old and maybe I've gone through the cycling phase, and I've gone through the writing phase, and maybe I'm in my jazz phase. I'm a drummer in a jazz band, but there's a lot of different flavors to life. So hopefully I'm experiencing a different one at that point.
Well, Leigh, it's been absolutely fascinating, and in the notes underneath this interview, we'll make sure we've got the link to the book, to your TED talk, to everything else that you're up to, socials, etc. And I think it's one of the things again we mentioned earlier. I can't remember if it was before we started recording of this. The journey really is just beginning, and I think if we can wake up every day and go, right, what's today's journey going to hold? And I think your story so far has very much embodied that, and I think there's a lot of people out there that take a lot from it. So on behalf of all our listeners out there, a huge thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing what happens next.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. That has been a real pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, what a story that was there. Thank you again, Leigh, so much for sharing some time with us. We've linked Leigh's book and his website in the show notes, and we cannot recommend enough checking that book out. It really is incredible. Don't forget to hit subscribe however you're joining us today, and we look forward to sharing our next conversation with you very soon on the Road Monkey podcast.